engagement there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Hey everyone, Kat Meyer here, your host for Head South Radio. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank our sound designer Lily, who stepped in for me to record last week's episode intro when I lost my voice. This week I chat with Carine Carmy, the CEO and co-founder of Origin. Origin is a female-based startup that offers in-person and digital pelvic floor therapy. You can find more information about the Origin on their website, theoriginway.com. Some staggering stats I recently learned, and for all of us to consider regarding pelvic floor health, is that 1 in 6 women or those with vaginal anatomy have chronic painful sex. 1 in 3 adult women experiences incontinence. And 1 in 2 women go through menopause suffering from vaginal atrophy. Unfortunately, there is no national standard for treatment, rehab, or recovery. Only recently has pelvic floor PT been recognized and utilized in the healthcare systems. Origin hopes to be the disruptor that pioneers a change to provide more accessible PT to those across the country. My conversation with Carine dives into her personal experience with painful sex due to pelvic dysfunction and her own journey with pelvic floor PT, which then in part inspired her to launch a business dedicated to supporting humans with pelvic floor issues. So settle in and find a comfortable seat, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. So I wanted to, before we jump into who you are and what you do, a little bit of a icebreaker. And so just a few questions to get to know Carine. Are you a dog or cat person?
So I am probably a cat person, but I have a dog that I love. So this is called the compromise of marriage.
And then, are you a morning or night person?
I feel like there's a theme to this. So I used to be a night person, and then my partner turned me into a morning person because I was up all the time, and now I love mornings.
What's your favorite scent?
Ooh, I really like oud and kind of Middle Eastern, really kind of earthy, smoky scents.
Me too. Yeah, very like woodsy, but clean and fresh too, like smoky clean.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's your favorite song right now?
I've actually been playing the song Seabird by the Leslie Brothers on repeat. It's really pleasant. I don't know what, 70s, something like that, but I don't know exactly what time, but it has this really like light, airy quality, but also very rhythmic and vocal. It's fun.
I'm going to have to check that out. I'm not familiar. And then cookies or brownies?
Cookies.
And what kind of cookie?
Like the thin, crispy chocolate chip or New York Levant Bakery chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which they're opening in LA. And I'm like, I will be out the door. Thank you.
Okay. So then let's talk about who you are and what is pelvic floor therapy, and if you can introduce your company, Origin.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. My name's Carine Carmy. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Origin. Before we dive into Origin, I guess we just spilled the beans. I'm a native Angelino, and we started Origin here in Los Angeles. And I've spent my career really working on technologies, products, and services that help people feel their best. And hopefully not just feel their best, but also bring their creativity and their passions to life and unlocking that. And so I've worked in many fields, everything from healthcare to 3D printing and everything in between, and have a penchant for type 2 fun, which is, the kind of hard fun that you realize is fun later on, like really tough hikes and starting businesses over and over again. So Origin is the fifth startup I've been involved in, and first in this role. So it's been a wild and fun ride. And what we really try to do at Origin is help our patients, the women who come to us, feel their best through every stage of life. And it starts because today, unfortunately, in the US, about 1 in 3 women and individuals with vaginal anatomy have pelvic floor dysfunction. And that can look like everything from painful sex to incontinence or leaking, prolapse, which often happens after giving birth, But there's also all the full body aches and pains that are unique to women, whether it's around birth recovery, menopausal changes, and even some conditions related to the female athlete too. And so these issues are far more common actually than seasonal allergies, which is wild. And yet there are only 4,000-ish providers across the country for these 40 million women. So there's a huge unmet need. And there's a lot of reasons why that's true, and we can talk about those. But what our mission is at Origin is really to increase access to pelvic floor therapy and full body PT that's specialized, that's beautifully designed, that feels safe and inclusive. And we also hope to reduce the shame and stigma that still exists around so many of these issues.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very vulnerable space for the patient to be in, and like that, I think that's why it's so common, but yet so not talked about at all, because it's that region of the body that people don't want to address. Or I think a lot of people, and you can confirm this, is that there are things that we assume are normal with postpartum, with pain, where we are told that the pain is part of our periods, part of like pain is a part of our existence. And so then we have a higher tolerance, I believe, of pain, but then dealing with or communicating about it is either riddled in shame or just acceptance, more toleration.
Right, exactly. I mean, that was my experience when I was in my 20s. I was actually living in New York, which has access to some of the best medical providers in the country. And I had an infection that ended up leading to chronic painful sex. And I went to all these different doctors, even at Cornell Med, and I could never get a diagnosis. And so all these doctors were like, try this cream. Like I literally had a vat of creams. I was trying one every couple of weeks. And at some point, they gave me a biopsy, which was actually completely unnecessary and really counterintuitive when you understand the pain science here. And it wasn't actually until my 30s when I was in LA that one, I learned I had a pelvic floor. I never even heard that phrase before. And two, that I learned about PT and how that could fit into my life and my recovery. And after nearly a decade of kind of on and off pain with intercourse, which is, felt like a life sentence, I ended up in PT. And after one session, I had a diagnosis, I had a plan of care. It was like this breath of fresh air. And what's so crazy is that the intervention that I was using was incredibly non invasive. Like for the first month, I just learned how to breathe because diaphragmatic breath was one of the core things I was missing that would help me release this tension that was creating this pain cycle.
To your point, like I think maybe quite a few of our listeners have never even heard of the pelvic
Yeah.
floor, or that pelvic floor therapy exists. I think I told you that last year I went to an event around this time called Free the Pelvis with my friend. My friend was hosting a panel talk, and they had a PT therapist on the panel. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And then I found out like a second cousin is a PT pelvic floor therapist, and it's expanded, and I've seen a lot and now understand a lot of what is out there, but it's not enough, to your point of like, that's such a small amount of specific pelvic floor therapy spaces for the amount of people that are going through these different disorders and different pain issues. And also the chronic pain, like chronic painful sex, is something that is affecting a lot of women between the ages of 20 and 40 and not knowing what to do. And it's kind of incredible. And I was going to ask you that, like, what is that experience like with pelvic floor therapy? So you described the first experience of just like learning to breathe and like the connection, because I work in yoga and wellness, I can see that like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense for like, a lot of this is tension, holding our bodies in a certain way. So if you can give us a description of like what a session looks like for somebody, and you can use yourself as an example, or, just what does that look like?
Yeah. And maybe even just to start, quick definition, what is the pelvic floor? For those who don't know, it's a region of our body in the same way we talk about our legs or our back, right? It's just this area, we're on Head South podcast, so you can understand where we're talking about. And it is a set of muscles and tissues that really hold up your organs and are responsible for everything from sexual function, which is what we're talking about right now, and whether it's painful sex or pleasure and orgasm, also responsible for continence. So can you hold your bladder and your bowels? Lymphatic flow, so your blood flow too, and even holding up your core and your organs. So it's this part of our body does a lot of work for us. And we can talk about later why it's not taught in schools and, other reasons there. But I wanted to start with the education piece because when you think about the Swiss Army knife that is PT, education is actually at the core of what we're doing with so many of our patients. Because if you don't understand your body and you don't understand, to what you shared earlier, what normal looks like, it's really, really hard to start your healing process. And so almost every first visit is starting with, let's do 101, let's understand our bodies. You don't necessarily need to take a mirror if you're not comfortable, but we'll bring out actually a pelvic floor anatomy, whether it's a visual or a model, and just help people understand what their own body looks like and how it functions. And that, I think, really helps regain a sense of control after probably years of, not talking about what's going on there, or using euphemisms for real anatomy, like down there, or, cha-cha, or whatever you want to call, whatever culturally is appropriate. So education is kind of that first piece. If it's necessary and if the patient is comfortable, there could be some hands-on therapy as well, but we do a lot of virtual care. So you actually don't even need to have hands-on therapy to learn how to heal. There's breathing and some other kind of understanding of where the pain is coming from so that you can start to connect to that. Oftentimes, as in my own case, there was almost a disassociation from the pain. You kind of like pull away because you don't want to experience it or feel it. And so part of that healing is confronting, where that is happening and starting to learn how to go through that. And then a lot of exercises. So those exercises could be breathing. If you have weak pelvic floor muscles, that's when you might use Kegels, which people have maybe heard about. There's also lengthening exercises and tools you can use, like dilators or Kegel weights, which can be used for various indications. A dilator kind of looks like a dildo, but it comes in various sizes. And it's a way that you can start to experience penetration in lighter touch, more controlled ways without having to go straight into sex again.
That's incredible. Sorry, I just need to take a second to be like, wow, it's wild. And it's what I love about this specifically is the empowerment for people, like the education component. I think when you're feeling pain, to your point of like, you disassociate from it because you don't want to draw attention to it. Maybe you're like, if you feel like it's going to exacerbate it. But in fact, it also then you become foreign from it. And like maybe you're having that pain and then you're like, oh, it's just my low back. You're not even associating it with the right part of your body. Like anatomically, you're kind of just like, oh, I'm having cramps. And it's like, but where is this coming from? What's going on in your body? And like really being a Sherlock Holmes, like kind of investigating and digging deep. And like, I like how you said, you have to confront that. And I think having the support system of your practitioners through that, because it is scary. It is a scary, especially if someone has had it for a chronic long time and has not had any information or feeling a bit lost. And it is helpful to have even just the virtual hand to hold to hear someone say like, this is normal and it's okay. And you can kind of feel that pain in the body and let yourself feel it. And that's the best way to then treat it. Because if we're like looking at it and just putting like a heating pad over our entire abdominal area or like our low back area, it's not really doing the thing. It's like a weird Band-Aid over a broken bone.
Well, what's really interesting, and it took me a while from personal experience to realize, and it's such a great metaphor for life, but the concept that sometimes there's pain because you're putting, let's say, your hand into the fire and you're like, okay, my hand is burning. This is painful. It's not burning right now, but in theory. Then there's also anticipatory pain where before I even put my hand into the fire, I'm already feeling the sensation. And that's real pain too. People often might think that it's, made believe or made up, but that's actually like how the brain works. It's really protecting ourselves. And so with painful sex and with other types of pain indications, what ends up happening is you can brace in anticipation of pain, and then it ends up creating the cycle. And so that is actually what happened for me and for many of our patients, where you end up almost creating this really challenging cycle to break. And so whether it's, you're joking about heat pads, but actually using heat, using relaxation techniques, breathing is that first step, because then you can actually start to enter, into a conversation with your body.
I think about when you were talking about like I habitually hold my shoulders up towards my ears. Like I clench my jaw. So a lot of my own yoga practice is learning to unclench unwind the areas that I hold tension. And exactly to your point, that pain is habitual, stays with you, and it tells a story in your body about what actually happened or what you anticipate on happening, whether it happens or not. And it's interesting that that's becoming more commonly spoken about in wellness, of like releasing the tension. We hold, I hear a lot of yoga teachers say, like, oh, we hold it in our hips and let it go. But it's actually being held in the pelvic bowl, in the pelvic floor, a lot of it. And we are still unwinding or like unraveling the stigma, the trauma, the hush hushness of speaking about that part of our anatomy and our bodies. And I love that, like, Origin is a place that, I mean, I looked at your website. It looks beautiful. It feels like a safe environment to be vulnerable, to talk about that, because it is hard to talk about, even just like the tension and stress that I'm holding in my shoulders, let alone I had a job where it was high stress and I wouldn't go to the bathroom. Like, I wouldn't pee all day. And I had a partner, and then I was dealing, now I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what it was. I was dealing with a lot of issues and going to lots of doctors, but I'm recognizing now, and I remember my partner pointing it out and being like, well, it sounds like you don't go to the bathroom all day because you're running around and you're super stressed out, and like, yeah, and just holding. And I'm like, oh, no wonder I was having painful sex and issues there. Now that we're just like in this moment talking to you about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, but that wasn't something like I would have never thought to talk to my doctor about that when I'm going to them and being like, I'm having yeast infections, I'm having UTIs, duh. Like, but not recognizing that, like, oh, for 8 hours I'm at work, but I'm so stressed that I can't actually, like, I would try to go and couldn't go to the bathroom. Yeah. So I feel like even just though it's not little things, but it's all of these little things added up together that have a huge impact, and things that we don't recognize, where we're holding tension, where we're resisting and creating, like you said, pain. Our bodies are built to protect us, but sometimes that over time leads to creating pain, holding, and trying to keep us safe.
Exactly. But the good news is it's all treatable, right? And so, I think even I just had a baby and I had to remind myself because I was like freaking out about, labor and delivery despite everything I know. I was going in really tense and I'm like, Karine, do not brace for the worst. Like you have no idea what it's going to be like. And once I learned how to release, it actually ended up being a lot less painful than I expected or than the movies, shared in my mind. And I ended up tearing, which was my worst case scenario, and I still recovered and I still healed. And I'm feeling fine now, even with my history. And so it's been this really beautiful personal reminder that even if you are in pain, there is never too late. There is always healing, and that you can retrain your body and your brain to orient towards pleasure and to orient towards the good as well. And so it took me, honestly, I'm still learning this, but a long time to kind of unlock that for myself. And, I'm just like, quote, the expert. And so I just wanted to share that because I feel like there's this myth or illusion that there could be a too late. Like if I'm 10 years postpartum and I'm still peeing my pants, I'm going to be peeing my pants for the rest of my life. Like that's not true. There's always an opportunity to retrain your body and retrain your mind.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it's never too late.
Yeah,
There's opportunity to regenerate, recuperate. The body is an amazing, amazing thing.
exactly.
It is built to heal, and it's more of we are in our own ways. We are blocking what our body is meant to be doing oftentimes, and it's not even trying to. We don't know that we're even doing it. So these types of resources, practices help to retrain the body, and you can be 90 years old and retrain your body and regenerate and
Exactly.
restore, recover, all of the
Yep.
and resetting things. And it's quite incredible. And I think by sharing this type of information, like having Origin out in the world and sharing it with people, allows people to then access it. And so I like that you mentioned that you guys are online. So it's not just available because you guys have locations in California and
And
Texas, I believe.
Texas.
Yes.
Yes.
And you guys started in 2020, which is pretty incredible to have. And you guys have quite a few like physical locations available across those two states. But with the digital offering, what does that look like? How do people access that?
Yeah, so actually, just last week we launched nationwide access, which I'm so excited about. And,
Congratulations.
thank you. The quick backstory is that until COVID, actually, the silver lining of COVID was that PT started moving digitally. And there's this false perception that PT is very hands-on, as we were talking about, but actually so much of the outcomes happens both with the education and in the programs you're doing between your visits. You can kind of almost think about your PT as your appointments as those check-in and milestones, but really it's a lot of how do you empower yourself between those visits. And so we had to launch virtual care like many other healthcare providers really quickly. And then in 2020, insurance companies started paying for virtual PT, which they had never done before. And so for the last 3 years, we've been piloting in California and Texas and New York a virtual program, which looks and feels actually quite similar to what you get in person. So it's a lot of education, kind of therapeutic exercise. We'll do also some techniques with certain other tools if necessary. So you can kind of have all of that. And then between your visits, we built our own home exercise program and educational library. So you're getting really all of that content and tools that you need to keep your therapy and your work going between those visits. We've prepared several programs. So one is a fourth trimester program, which is our vision of what every person needs to do after they give birth and should have access to. I just did it myself, and I was able to talk to a PT on my team, which was incredible, like 2 weeks after I gave birth, and I was having all of these symptoms, and I couldn't talk to my doctor for another 4 weeks. And it was just such an incredible way to start both the healing process, but also the movement process too. So it's all available online. It's at our website, theoriginway.com. And one of the things that we've started working on and we're so excited about is trying to get in network as much as possible with insurance companies, because this should not be, nice to have. This is really a must have for all of these different reasons patients will come in. And we now have national contracts with some of the biggest commercial payers. And so I'm just so thrilled we can start to chip away at that. We're not, there with everyone yet because some insurance companies are, taking their time. As we know, the healthcare system moves very slowly, but
Like a
we're working on
glacier.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, what is the right metaphor? I was like, how do I say this euphemistically? So,
Mhm. Yeah. So for people who maybe aren't in network or don't have insurance, are there ways that they can access even just a little bit of this information
yeah.
just to self-educate and maybe find a practitioner?
Yeah. So we do offer kind of out of network services as well, and we'll give you a super bill. And a lot of plans actually will cover most, if not all, of your visit out of network. So it really depends on your plan. We're also right now offering some really discounted introductory sessions for folks so that they can at least start to understand, what this could look like and if they can find ways to support themselves through this process. And then on our website, we have so much incredible free educational content because it's just really important for us and for, I think, this whole community of patients and women around the country to start understanding our bodies a little bit better. And so on our blog, you can find introduction to the pelvic floor and now hundreds of posts based on your diagnoses and what you're looking for.
I just wanted to share too that if you're listening to this and you don't have vaginal anatomy, but you're listening to this and maybe you've had a partner who's experienced pain or a relative, I highly recommend you point them in the direction of origin. So like anyone who's listening, I want to make it very clear that like you don't have to be the person experiencing the conversation that we're having, but there may be someone in your life who is. And so I think it's important to share these types of resources and let people know that this is available. And I think it's safe to assume that like even just suggesting it to anybody in your life who you're very close with who may have just given birth, or I could think of so many different people in my life who I would definitely recommend this sort of therapeutics to. And so I just wanted to encourage listeners to do that as well. And so how can people find you with your website and then also Instagram? Are you guys on TikTok, Instagram? What social media platforms are you
Yeah,
guys?
we're on all the things except Twitter because I can't deal with Twitter anymore. Sorry. But it's the Origin Way. So theoriginway.com, and that's our handle on all the platforms. And we chose that because we're really trying to shift, this way of connecting to our bodies, this way of getting healed, and really pushing towards more of these non-invasive interventions. Because I can't even tell you the number of times folks ended up getting recommended to surgery or lasers or, these really intense interventions before they take the basic intro steps of understanding their body and connecting to their own anatomy. So really passionate about that shift. And it feels like we're at the beginning of a sea change. The conversations, to your point, that folks are having with their friends and their family, are much more open and dynamic than they ever were before. And It's really also not just about pregnancy, although as a patient, I'm like, it was very useful. You know, in your teens, if you're an athlete, for example, we see so many athletes who leak, especially CrossFit athletes, high performance runners, and they think that's normal and, end up having this issue for a long period of time. If you have endometriosis, PCOS, chronic pelvic pain, even chronic UTIs are sometimes actually really pelvic floor dysfunction, and not a bacterial infection. So there's all these reasons why I would always just even recommend whatever your anatomy is, just start connecting to your body, start understanding, what your normal looks like so that if things shift over time, as they might in the same way, like my shoulders are hurting me today, my hips hurt me tomorrow, you kind of know what your baseline is.
I think it's great that you mentioned the age, and anyone who is aware of this is aware of it for aging. And in fact, like I've actually heard of that too for like runners, gymnasts, anyone who might be experiencing impact, cheerleaders, and experiencing impact on their bodies in a different way. And then thinking that some of these things like leaks or discomfort is normal or that's something that they have to tolerate. But it runs a very wide spectrum of age and lifestyle for having this type of therapeutic available. And I appreciate that you mentioned that, like teenagers, because I don't think people think that or think that this is an option for them. I think it's like, I would associate a lot of pelvic floor therapy with, like you mentioned, postpartum and then aging, but not athletes.
Yeah, and we're trying to do more actually with gyms and with sports teams because, there's almost even a bigger taboo in those conversations where it feels like, oh, I just can't even talk about it. Like, let me wear adult diapers. And obviously, there's no shame on having to use intervention, but I would really love for the conversation to shift towards, okay, how do we prevent this from ultimately happening for you?
Yeah, I just watched the Boston Marathon. I was just there
Oh, yeah,
watching the runners, and my partner had mentioned that like there's a certain brand that had historically been training women, elite athlete women, in a certain way that was built for men and not considering female bodies, female anatomy, any of that. And there's lawsuits against these brands and these coaches who were training women and, dropping their contracts because they got pregnant or postpartum, couldn't run for a while. Things like that are happening in the athletic world. And so options like this and knowing that, especially when you're not elite and sponsored and have all of the funding, but just recreational athletes, people who do this for their bodies and not know that this is an option to kind of help with the longevity of their practices too, whether it's running
exactly.
or moving their bodies, thinking the long game and sustainable practices and not having to give up things that you love and enjoy that bring you passion because of, and we're careful to manage what goes on our feet and what kind of sports bra that we wear, but this is a part of that too.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like to share?
We talked a lot about pain today, and I think it's really important because there's so much shame and stigma around pain, especially for folks who've had history of trauma and sexual abuse, which unfortunately is far too many. But I also wanted to share that connecting to your pelvic floor can also lead to pleasure. And we have seen from a lot of our patients that actually reducing pelvic floor dysfunction can lead to better or first time orgasms for patients. And you can almost think about it in the same way that your bicep, if you're ever doing a bicep curl, you have the contraction phase, the lengthening phase. And a lot of us with our pelvic floors are really good at contracting. We're really good at holding tension, but we're not great at lengthening. And for an orgasm, you actually need to be able to do both. You can almost think about it in the easiest ways. How do you relax so that you can experience that? I don't like to say relax because it can feel more mental and more shame around that. But if you can actually train your body and your pelvic floor how to lengthen, how to relax and almost descend like an elevator hitting the bottom of the floor, it can really improve your connection to pleasure. And so I always just love to say that because I think there's so much that's wrong with women's health in this country. There's so much lack of education. Providers are so far behind. But it would really behoove us to start also just thinking about, okay, like what could feeling really good look like, not just getting too neutral.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's funny because I just learned that a few weeks ago speaking to a homeopathic doctor, and we were talking about men's health. And he was talking a lot about the nervous system. So that's what his focus is on. And we'll record that episode soon. But I did not know that, like, we require both our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous systems to work to have orgasm. Both in male, female, all genders need both of those. Like, two things need to happen for an orgasm to happen, for ejaculation to happen. It's something I had never been aware of, and oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, the tension, the buildup, all of that happens in the body, but the orgasm to happen, you also have to have the relaxation, and there's a shift in the body, and if the body doesn't know what to
Yeah.
do in that moment, it won't happen.
Right. And if it's not intuitive because you've been trained how to do that. But I can't wait to listen to that because I'm not as familiar with the nervous system connection there. So
Yeah, I'm really excited about that episode and how to create a lifestyle for pleasure. And so I'm so glad you brought that up because, yeah, a lot of pelvic floor information comes from this place of pain because that's a big indicator and that's what leads people to it. And recognizing that you might not be experiencing pleasure to the fullest extent, to your fullest potential, pleasure that you can fully experience. And this pelvic floor therapy can lead to that and allow you to experience the full potential of pleasure in the body and in your experiences. So thank you so much for being a guest on Head South Radio. I'm really excited.
thanks for having me.
We're launching this episode as a part of a series for pelvic floor health. May is Pelvic Floor Health Awareness Month. Pelvic floor health should happen all year round, but this is the time of year when people want to bring awareness to it, talk about these disorders, have these conversations. It's a helpful way to find and access the resources needed. And so thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Kat. Have a great day and congrats on this podcast. I'm so excited that you're continuing this conversation in so many ways.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me, I'm heading south. All year round, I'm going down. Now you know where I'll be, I'm heading south. So come on.